I want to talk about fear and business owners. And I'm a therapist and also an owner of my own business. And so I love the idea of talking about these two things hand in hand. And it's incredibly important for solid business owners and to be successful is to really be successful managing your fear and managing your emotions. But today I want to talk about specifically fear and how fear can crush you as a small business owner and also make or at least tend to make you make the wrong moves in your business. So one example I like to think about is like competition. So that's a common fear that we have as business owners, small business owners. You need to watch the competition, but how do you do that in a way that you're not overwhelmed with fear and how you're not overwhelmed with that paranoia of competition? And specifically today, I want to discuss, fear of competition when it comes to hiring. So a lot of times when you're in the service industry, your product is your employees and how important it is to train them and make sure you're providing excellent service. But when your employees leave, that often can really hurt your business. So you have to be watching the competition when it comes to hiring, when it comes to, having your employees love your experience and stay with you and you treat them well and that sort of thing. So one thing I see is when people do have turnover, they often have panic, and I can relate to this. So I don't mean to gloss over the empathy part of this. Like, of course, that is hugely impactful, not only to your revenue and to your health of your business, but also to you emotionally. It feels hurtful when you lose employees. But one thing we don't want to do, and I learned this as a therapist, we want to make sure that we're aware of our emotions and not necessarily react to them without doing some analysis or using our kind of our logical brain or our reasonable brain. And as business owners, that's really, really crucial. How do you govern the emotional impacts of these things, and how do you kind of hold how you're feeling versus the reality of what's happening and strategic moves you make or don't make? And so one of the things that I think about a lot when it comes to this kind of fear is like when you have that panic, the first thing you want to do is think about, well, okay, so let's study it a little bit. Let's look at the data and let's see, okay, let's check to see, are our employees leaving for the common reasons that we immediately think, oh, we don't pay enough, our competitors are better. But often when you do the proper exit interviews, you do it in a way that you really get the truth, you find out a lot of times that's not the case at all, that people leave for other circumstances that had nothing to do with something that was in your control. That's very important to know. And you don't know this until you track. It's possible that you're doing something really wrong in your business and people are leaving for that reason. So I don't want to sugarcoat that. That's important. But analyzing it first and learning how to do that. And so I talk a lot about evidence-based business practices. And that's one of the very first things you do is just study why they're leaving, and even a tracking sheet, which I can go through maybe in another video. But this idea of just making sure you're understanding why are they leaving. So that's an important piece. And then once you really understand rationally, what are the reasons for people leaving? Is it greater than what you'd expect, right? Because there's turnover in employee businesses. That's just the way it is. Is it higher or lower than what it should be? And if it is, then okay, now strategically, what do we do about it? The other part that I find that's really deadly to small business owners is fear often becomes hopelessness. So when you get hopeless, man, that is really, really challenging, not only emotionally, but also for your business. You start to feel like there's nothing I can do. You stop putting any effort into improving things because you kind of feel like, oh, no matter what, I'm destined to just fail because this is just the way it is. And so often I have to remind people, or even for myself, I've gone through all this myself, but as a coach, it's helpful to be reminding people of, okay, have you really done the evidence-based tactics to improve this yet? And my estimation in my coaching is it's like 10%. People have done 10% of all the things they can do to improve these different aspects of your business. So for instance, employee turnover, employee hiring. When I think about all the different things that all the business books have taught me and what I've learned in my own personal experience, people aren't doing those tactics, those techniques. So in some ways, I'd say that's good news because it means, well, don't be hopeless yet. You haven't done the things that you can do to improve these things. And I call that the double-edged sword of business. There's always more you can do in terms of your tactics, your strategy, your improvements. The reason why it's a double-edged sword is because it's exhausting and overwhelming at times, and maybe you don't even know what those things are. So that's another piece of it. But I see it as good news. And so I kind of feel like if I talk to myself or if I talk to my clients, hey, you're not allowed to be hopeless until you do the things that we know make a difference. And if you've done all those things, okay, now I don't want to say you have a right to be hopeless, but it's much more reasonable to be hopeless or to change your tactics. I mean, obviously hopelessness isn't a good thing no matter what, but I think that's really important to think about. That idea is like making sure you're doing the tactics that lead to these things. So like I said, tracking, making sure you're doing stay interviews, not exit interviews, things like asking your employees what they like about your business, what they don't like about your business. I'll just go over these things kind of real briefly, and then I'll cover these maybe more in a later thing. But making sure you're having those conversations to really see, how do I elevate my experience here in my business? How do I make sure the culture is really, really sound? Do I have strong values that I emulate, and I make sure I'm hiring the people that want these values? Am I making sure that the employee experience is good? Would I want to work in my own business? Do I want to have a business that's constantly changing and chaotic and stressful and micromanaging, or do I want a business that's well run, that keeps the friction low? Those are all huge things. Culture's amazing. Values are important. Pay is important, but guarantee you, almost every business owner jumps immediately to thinking their pay is too low when people leave. And almost always the research is very solid on this. It's not the reason people leave. Typically, as long as your pay is kind of within that nice range of, reasonableness, people don't always stay or leave for pay. And so those are things to really understand. And the more, I love reading, because reading really reinforces that. Plus, I see that in my coaching, and I see that in my own business. So I have lots of experience that helps me remember these things when I start to freak out. So anyway, I got a lot more to say on this, but I wanted to do a short video just talking about fear, avoidance, using the right tactics, hopelessness, and how that all comes together, and how important it is to manage those things so you can then properly do the right strategies, do the right techniques, and not feel so burnt out or overwhelmed with all that stuff that's going on. So hopefully that was helpful. If this is interesting to you and you want to learn more, you're welcome to reach out, and we could talk about one-on-one coaching. Thank you.